Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. Apologize, but it'll be a bit of a shorter one today. Anywho, thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 20. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought aromatic spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, at sunrise, they went to the tomb. They had been asking each other, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled back. Then as they went into the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there's the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples, even Peter, that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there, just as he told you." Then they went out and ran from the tomb, for terror and bewilderment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Early on the first day of the week after he arose, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had driven out 7 demons. She went out and told those who were with him, while they were mourning and weeping. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they did not believe. After this, he appeared in a different form to 2 of them while they were on their way to the country. They went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them. Then he appeared to the 11 themselves while they were eating, and he rebuked them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they did not believe those who had seen him resurrected. He said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. The one who believes and is baptized will be saved, but the one who does not believe will be condemned. These signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will drive out demons. They will speak in new languages. They will pick up snakes with their hands, and whatever poison they drink will not harm them. They will place their hands on the sick, and they will be well." After the Lord Jesus had spoken to them, he was taken up into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God. They went out and proclaimed everywhere, while the Lord worked with them and confirmed the word through the accompanying signs. Yeah, and this, I think, is one of the things that has to be dealt with. If you believe anything in history, Jesus' death on the cross is a pretty sure fact. We know that about as much as we know anything in history. So, how did these disciples, who were disenchanted, disillusioned, disappointed, weeping, mourning, in hiding, go from that state to shaking up the Roman world? There were messiahs previous to Jesus who attracted a following. All of their cults have since died out, but not Christianity. And one has to contend with that fact. That what was the impetus? What pushed these men out of hiding, out of mourning, out of weeping, and into this ecstatic explosion of wanting to share this information, wanting to push that Christ really was the Messiah, really is the Messiah? Yeah, it's something that has to be contended with. When the Sabbath was past, the earliest the women could go to the tomb and properly embalm the body of Jesus was on Sunday morning. Sabbath was over at the start of Saturday evening, but it wasn't light enough until Sunday morning to do the work. The time from sundown on Friday to sunrise on Sunday must have been dark, empty, desperate days for the disciples. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. These women proved themselves to be the most devoted followers of Jesus, and they were the first to proclaim his resurrection. They brought spices. Spices were not used for mummification, which was not a Jewish custom, but to offset the odors from decomposition. But they asked, "Who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us?" The women were not expecting to find an empty tomb. They came wondering how the stone door would be opened. This shows that the resurrection accounts cannot be the product of wishful thinking. The disciples of Jesus did not expect it to happen. Yeah. And what purpose would there be in propping up this false... So Jesus dies and they're left there without their leader. And so they come up with this ploy to say that that he was resurrected. They steal his body away, and then they parade this lie around to everybody. What did they have to gain? The disciples all went, except for one, to their bloody deaths with this message. They didn't do it for the reasons that cults typically do it, which is fame, fortune, power, women. But on the contrary, the apostles ended up persecuted and poor and driven from place to place. The stone was not rolled away to let Jesus out. John 20:19 tells us that Jesus, in his resurrection body, could pass through material barriers. It was rolled away so that others could see into the tomb and be persuaded that Jesus Christ was risen from the dead. A young man clothed in a long white robe sitting. The women saw an angel in human form who told them of the resurrected Jesus and showed them the empty tomb. He was crucified, but he's risen. The angel painted the contrast between what Jesus was and what he is. He was crucified, beyond all doubt. That means he was dead. Now he is risen, not only resuscitated, but resurrected. There are several examples in the Bible of people being resuscitated before this, such as the widow's son in the days of Elijah and Lazarus. Each of these was resuscitated from death, but none of them were resurrected. Each of them was raised in the same body they died in, and raised from the dead to eventually die again. Resurrection isn't just living again, it is living again in a new body, based on our old body, perfectly suited for life in eternity. Jesus was not the first one brought back from the dead, but he was the first one resurrected. See the place where they laid him. The actual event of Jesus' resurrection is nowhere described, but the discovery of it is recorded in some detail. Here, the women who intended to give Jesus' body a more proper preparation for burial discovered that the stone was rolled away from the tomb and that the body of Jesus was not inside the tomb. Those women were later grateful that the angel told them to see the place where they laid him. It should have been enough to merely hear the testimony of the angel. Nevertheless, when they saw it, it gave them ground to stand on, even more solid than the testimony of an angel. One eyewitness is better than 20 ear witnesses. Men will believe what you have seen if they do not believe what you have heard. He is risen. The fact of Jesus' resurrection is a matter of history. What it means can only be understood by what the Bible tells us. Therefore, it is important to consider what the empty tomb of Jesus and his resurrection means. The resurrection means that Jesus was declared to be the Son of God with power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead. The resurrection means that we have assurance of our own resurrection. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. The resurrection means that God has an eternal plan for these bodies of ours. There was nothing in the teaching of Jesus approaching the Gnostic heresy that declared that the flesh is inherently evil. Plato could only get rid of sin by getting rid of the body. Jesus retains the body. and declares that God feeds the body as well as the soul, that the body is a sacred thing as the soul, since the soul makes it its sanctuary. From Morgan. The resurrection means that Jesus has a continuing ministry. He is also able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him, since he ever lives to make intercession for them. The resurrection means that Christianity and its God are unique and completely different and unique among world religions. The resurrection proves that though it looked like Jesus died on the cross like a common criminal, he actually died as a sinless man out of love and self-sacrifice to bear the guilt of our sin. The death of Jesus on the cross was the payment, but the resurrection was the receipt, showing that the payment was perfect in the sight of God the Father. Yeah. The resurrection shows that God was pleased with the sacrifice of Jesus, and that he served as substitutionary atonement for us. Go and tell. Through the angel, the women received a message from Jesus they had to deliver. We might think of this message as an invitation, because through this message, the disciples were invited to meet with Jesus. Tell his disciples and Peter. We are amazed that Jesus wanted to meet with these men who failed him so deeply, yet he made special notice of Peter. Some say he distinguished Peter because he was separate from the rest of the disciples, in the sense that he was no longer among them. This was probably not the case. Instead, Jesus distinguished Peter because he had special hope, special forgiveness, special restoration for the one who denied him the worst. Yeah. It's the lost sheep that God pursues. From Spurgeon here. If any of you have behaved worse to your master than others, you are peculiarly, I can speak, called to come to him now. You have grieved him, and you have been grieving. Because you have grieved him, you have been brought to repentance after having slidden away from him, and now he seals your pardon by inviting you to himself. And they said nothing to anyone. This does not mean that they made no report of the resurrection, because we plainly know that they did. In Mark 16:11 and Luke 24:9, it means that as they left the scene of the empty tomb, they did not discuss it among themselves. They didn't try to figure it out or match their stories. They simply went to make a report to the disciples, as the angel invited them to do. Yeah, and then you have the long ending for Mark here, which is a bit to get into. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. This was a command, not a suggestion. Interest in missions is not an elective in God's University of Grace. It is something in which every disciple is expected to major. The idea of a faith that should go into all the world wasn't a part of the Jewish thinking in the days of Jesus. It wasn't part of the pagan thinking either. It was a revolutionary idea in its time. An army chaplain once said to the Duke of Wellington, "Do you think that it is of any use our taking the gospel to the hill tribes in India? Will they ever receive it?" The Duke replied, "What are your marching orders?" That was the only answer he gave. Stern disciplinarian, as that great soldier was, he only wanted marching orders, and he obeyed. And he meant that every soldier of the cross must obey the marching orders of Christ, his great commander. From Spurgeon. And these signs will follow those. Jesus gave his disciples a promise of divine power and protection. This promise is to be understood in the context of the dangers inherent in the worldwide spread of the gospel. As Paul was bitten by a snake and preserved on the island of Malta, Jesus never intended drinking poison or handling snakes to be a specific test or measure of faith. Yeah. And doing so reminds me of Satan's temptation of Jesus, when he said, "Cast yourself down from here, and the angels will bear you up on their wings." And Jesus said, on the contrary, it's written, not to test the Lord your God. Yeah. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.